Hello everybody, Thomas Fleming here again. I just started the camera with my glove off, so excuse me while I put it up back on again. These are my full gloves because it's cold out. I'm going to be taking a little boat tour coming up, so I wanted to get my video out early. I think it's like 8 o'clock. There's no internet in my campsite, so I managed to get to your comments this morning when I drove up here to the visitor center. It's all atmospheric. It's completely clear. The sun is just barely above the horizon. And it's quiet. You can hear the birds and squirrels running up and down trees a little bit. Saw a couple of deer right next to the campsite coming in. So it's the wilderness. All right, I've had a number of people in the last month or so want to know my testimony, and I've told it before, and I mentioned when I talked about it that I really don't like talking about it. It's one of those things that I've had a very, very blessed life. And because of that, if I talk about it, it sounds like I'm boasting. Well, if I'm boasting of anything, it's not of me, it's of God. Because God gives you, what you have in your life. So here we go. Get your coffee, your tea, and get ready to get bored. As a kid, I knew who God was, but I didn't really know anything about all the details. I didn't know about a Savior or any of that, but I knew who God was. My parents were not religious, let's just put it that way. They weren't anti-anything, it's just that they didn't really have any upbringing to teach them. But my mother knew instinctively, or inspired by God, that I needed some education, so she sent me to various churches, trying to find one that I would be happy with. So I've sat in Catholic churches studying catechism. I've studied in just generic, I don't know if they had Baptist churches back then, but that would be the closest, because it was out west, on the west coast where I lived then as a kid. And so I learned a lot about God, but I didn't learn about Jesus. That's the sad part of the churches then. And because my aunt was married to a wealthy Jewish businessman, I even got to go to a number of temples where I studied the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. I had my alphabet primer. I think I still have it someplace. So my basic teaching was varied, but I didn't have the right teaching, and that's the problem today that we got to really focus on. You can start the conversation with God, but you better end it with Jesus. So anyhow, toward the end of my parents' time together, they ended up getting a divorce, stayed together for the kids, a traditional thing back then. I needed to get out and away from the house, and I was a senior in high school, so I decided, and Vietnam was going on, but they had the draft going, and I figured I was going to get drafted and told where I could go, so I better do something proactive. So I went and looked to see where I could join up. I wanted to go in the Air Force first because I already knew how to fly. My dad had worked for an aircraft company. But they wouldn't take me because I wore glasses. I've had LASIK, so I don't have to wear glasses for distance. I wore bifocals at one point, so that's why I still have my glasses for reading. They can't do both yet. Anyhow, I went in the Navy. And I told them what I wanted to do. Since I couldn't fly, I was going to get on a boat. Oh, I could have been a helicopter pilot. But at that time, 1 in 3 helicopter pilots were not coming back. This was Vietnam. Underpowered helicopters were being shot at. They couldn't put any more armor on them because they barely had enough power to take off as it was. The soldiers would literally sit on their helmets in the helicopter to protect their important parts from being shot. Okay, so I'm going in the Navy. They send me to go to school. I'm going to learn radar. And not Gary Berghoff, but real radar. And this was before we had microwave. They didn't know all the other commercial uses. So they send me to San Francisco. This is going to be a long story. I don't know. It gets boring, but I'm giving you all the details. So you can see how God blessed me throughout the time. They sent me to San Francisco to go to school to learn radar. The school was on Treasure Island in the San Francisco Bay. The Oakland-San Francisco Bridge goes across and it stops at an island. The island is Yerba Buena. And for the 1930 some odd, I don't know when it was, World's Fair, a long time ago, they had actually added land and made a big flat area out there so they could put a lot of amusement stuff there. And it had a beautiful view of San Francisco back when San Francisco was a beautiful city. It's not anymore. Satan and his trove out in the left coast have basically destroyed San Francisco. Anyhow, I get there to go to school. After about a week of orientation and all the other stuff that they put you through, they come back with, "You're not supposed to be here." I had boot camp before this, by the way, but not much to say about that. Except I learned it's not what you know, but who you know during boot camp. So I'm there, and he goes, "You're not supposed to be here." And I go, "Well, I signed up for radar. Isn't this a radar school?" And he goes, "Yeah, but you got to have basic electronics first." And I go, "Well, I already had that in high school. I don't know that I need it again." He goes, "No, I know, but it's the government. You got to follow the rules." So he goes, "I called and tried to get you in this class down there, but it's already started. And they said that you need to just wait and pick up the next class when it comes around." So they sent me home, which at the time was Reno, Nevada. That's where my dad had moved with his new job. So outside of boot camp, I really hadn't done a whole lot. And here I am, I'm going back home again for 6 weeks. So rough life in the military. Then I finally get to go to San Diego for the basic electronic class. Yeah, it's all over the place, and I'm sure on the East Coast it's the same way. So I get down there. It's a 9-week course, and like I said, I already had this in high school, so I finished it in about 4 weeks. The next electronic or radar class in San Francisco didn't start for another 7 or 8 weeks, so they sent me home again. Yeah, I'm spending a lot of time on the taxpayer's dollar, unfortunately, and not accomplishing much. So they send me back to the radar school eventually. And this particular time, I was there long enough that I actually would go into town. Here we're coming up on the salvation part of this, or the beginning of it. They had buses that went into San Francisco, and we'd go there and we'd take in the sights, the tourist traps, and all the other places that were there. And over by the wharf area, Fisherman's Wharf area, there was this red bus and these cute girls handing out pamphlets of some sort, so they got our attention. They were hostesses from the church that had sent their missionary bus there to pick up sailors and get them off the street and bring them back to church. It was called the port of call. So we all, those of us that were there that they managed to snag, went back on the bus with them for the weekend. Of course, we didn't have all of our toiletries, but they provided all that when we got there. And the church was, I can't remember the name of it now. It's been changed. The port of call is gone. It's called the Three Crosses now. It's in Castro Valley, if you know where that's at, in the San Francisco East Bay side. And it has 3 tall crosses. You can't miss them if you're driving on the freeways on the eastern side. So anyhow, we get in there, and this is Friday night, so we get food. They have a sing-along, things like that. The hostesses are there. It's sort of like when you used to do the old dance things, although we didn't dance, but when they used to do the dances, you'd go get yourself a ticket from a hostess. This wasn't an invitation to do anything you're not supposed to. This was just a chance to dance. Well, here, this was a chance to talk with the girls, and we are, all young men hoping for chances to talk to girls, and we get an opportunity here. We go out we play some volleyball. On Saturday, we played softball. So basically, it was a bit of fun and games until Sunday. And then we went to church. And we got the message. Pastor Beelig was his name, was the head pastor there. But the pastor that was in charge of the port of call was also the organ player, Reverend David Von Rotz. They're both gone, obviously, at this time. So I did this for probably half of my time in school, and they'd keep having the invitation, and I keep avoiding it. But I started working with Dave on helping to repair his organ. This was an old organ that came out of some kind of a theater in San Francisco, big pipe organ. It was up in a loft in one corner of this church had basically a stage with the raising and up and down of the flats that you would drop behind things if you want to do a scene. It was a theatrical type display, this type of stage, with the organ up in the corner. And the baptism was in the other corner. That's why I was baptized eventually. And in 2 rooms on either side of the stage were rooms full of air-driven instruments, pipes, tambourines, all kinds of things that made noise. And they were all controlled from his one little booth there, the organ itself, and all controlled by air. So it's under need of constant, I don't want to say repair, but upkeep. So anyhow, he began working on me. And that was probably my best thing. My inquisitiveness of seeing how the organ worked and hanging around with him. I eventually accepted Christ. That was the best thing that happened to me in my life at that point, because I was wandering around looking for God, but didn't know where to find him. My previous church history did not provide that. So anyhow, I began helping out, but when I grew up, we moved around so much. I was extremely shy. Didn't want to get up in front and talk to anybody. Didn't want to do anything that would put me in the limelight. And so I really didn't do a whole lot there, other than just contribute to the group there. I probably led a few people to Christ, but not as many as I should for the time that I was there. These soldiers, young sailors, were ripe for the picking, and I just really couldn't talk to them. Only found a few that I could. But anyhow, eventually I finished my school and had to move on. And of course they sent me home to wait for my ship. And I figured I'm going to be heading to the West Coast someplace on a ship. And as with most people, if you don't stay with it, you're going to backslide. So I'm beginning to start backsliding. I was never a bad person, but I was starting to backslide. And they flew me to the Philippines to meet the ship, because the ship was already under duty in Vietnam. It was a destroyer, and we were an escort for the Enterprise. And you know the meaning of that. And if you're a Star Trek fan like I am, that was an amazing thing. Because in the 60s, we got to see the Star Trek Enterprise on TV for the first time. Anyhow, I get to the ship. I'm backsliding. And the way God looks after us, since I was new to the division, they made me the male guy. Now, they tried the male buoy trick on me, but I already was warned about that, so that didn't work. That's where you're supposed to go out and stand on the fantail and watch for the male buoy so you could pick your male up at sea. It's things you do to new recruits. But anyhow, I was warned, so I didn't do that, but I still had to go get the mail from the postman and bring it back to the division so they could, everybody can get it in one spot. Well, apparently I'd mentioned it one time or just talked about it casually. I never really thought about it. But the head mail guy there was a Christian. This was the military. People don't, talk about being Christian very often, especially once you're underway. But he wanted to. So we ended up having, Bible studies and doing things, and I had to see him every day. And initially I was a little bit reluctant because I just don't like to talk to people that much, but he was friendly enough and we managed to get along. And then when we came back to the United States and the ship went in the yards because it had been shot at and broken so many times there was not much left of it, they took my equipment off the ship and we had to live in barracks. And 4 of us managed to get into one barracks, all 4 Christians. So that's how God works. That would not be something we could have organized because we were all in different departments, and trying to get the government to organize themselves is not easy. Well, this is a time in the early 70s to mid 70s where there was a big revival going on nationwide, but definitely in the Southern California area. There was a church that we heard about that had music on Saturday night. Christian music, folk music, light rock, nothing really your parents wouldn't want you to hear type of thing. And that was Calvary Chapel, and the pastor was Chuck Smith. If you know anything about your early history, you know who I'm talking about. So it was a bit of a drive, about an hour drive, but we would drive there for Saturday night. We didn't stay for church services on Sunday because it was too much to drive that much on the weekend. We had local churches that we worked with, but we'd go there for that music. And that's the time when like Maranatha music was started. What's her name? I can't remember their names now. It's been so long ago. In any case, there were all the famous songwriters and singers were there of the time. And so we got to listen to this music, have a good time, and then go back. I mean, we weren't going there to drink and party. We were just going there to celebrate God, so that was okay. So there was no problem driving back when we were done. So I did this for a while, and eventually I get out of the Navy, And I decided to go back to the Silicon Valley area, which was close by where I went to school there in San Francisco, and on the other side of the bay from where I was going to church there, and continued to grow in Christ. But I was still a little timid about getting up in front of people. Now, long story short, I worked in Silicon Valley for a while. I moved to LA, went to work for TRW Aerospace with the knowledge that I had, which was greater than anybody coming out of college, because I had actual experience working with the equipment and the technology, and I could build a computer from scratch and I could program it. I learned all that in Silicon Valley. So I was working, God was having me work as an engineer, getting paid as an engineer, but I didn't have a degree. And that's the way I like to work. And I'm a self-starter, so I don't have any problem doing any of that. So that was interesting. I met my wife there, and we stayed for a few years there, but it was starting to get out of hand even back then, over 30 years ago now. We needed a place to get out. I didn't want my kids in the school system there, and that's why we moved to Georgia. And the kids did go to school here. My oldest did very well. He was going to a Christian college in North Georgia until he found out that he couldn't transfer his credits. They had a program when he first went up there that they would transfer his credits to Georgia Tech. He was a geek like me. And when they stopped that program, he just went up to Chattanooga in Tennessee. And is it Chattanooga Tech, Chattahoochee Tech? I don't remember what it's called, but whatever their main college there. And he gets to be a junior. He finishes his junior year, but he's getting work experience. So I'm going to brag about him for a little bit. He says, I've got companies that want me to fly out to California and interview with them about taking a job with them. And I said, well, if they're going to fly you, take advantage of it, get the free meal, and then decide what you want to do. You're not obligated. They're trying to woo you into coming to work for them. So he did. He went out 3 times. And eventually he took a job there and stayed with them for a little while. And like me, without his degree, he's making better money than he would have made if he'd gotten his degree. Mike Rowe is right. You don't need a degree. It helps to get you in the door. But my Navy got me in the door. That's all I needed. So he eventually starts his own company, and he's living in San Francisco. And he stayed there for a number of years, but he finally, this last year, gave up on it and moved north of Chicago someplace. His wife that he met either before or after they moved out there, I don't remember. But they moved nearer to her family in the North Chicago area along the Great Lake there. So he's carrying on in my footsteps. And I couldn't argue with him because he was right. Now, my younger son, he struggled a little bit because, as I've talked about in the past, he's got Asperger. It's a communication problem. He's very smart, but maturity-wise, he's not very mature because you don't get the experience of talking to people unless you talk to people. And he wouldn't do that for a long time. So we raised him in church, and he worked in our church for 12 years in the maintenance department, became the head of one section of it. But eventually he left there, and he wants to do some missionary work. So he found some people online in Peru, and that's where he's at now, working with the church there, teaching him English. He knows how to do the maintenance and all that stuff, like I said. So he really likes living over there, and he's got himself a girlfriend there now, so he really wants to be there. But we got to figure out how I can get him a work visa. So we're trying to work on that with the church that's over there so we can stay longer. He can only stay for 90 days. Then he has to come back for 90 days, and then he can go back over for 90, on and off 90. But in any case, that's pretty much my story. But to get to where I'm at now, where I'm able to do this without any problem, I grew up in Southern California. I lived in West Hollywood. I played with the Kids of Stars. So I kind of got to know what was going on. And my dad, being a celebrity in his own right, he was a Major League Baseball player. From 39 to 46, he played for the Boston Red Sox and the Chicago Cubs. He was a pitcher. And on the Boston Red Sox, he had on his team, at the same time he was there, Ted Williams. And my dad would say, "I'm glad I only have to pitch to him in practice." But celebrity stuff, I've been around wealthy people and celebrities all my life. We all put our pants on one leg at a time. There's nothing special about them. And they may or may not be a good person. They may or may not go to church. They may or may not be Christians. Fortunately, the ones that I remember the most did. And they were very good people now. They tended to flock towards the Catholic Church more than any other church, but that's all right. Like Billy Graham says, he's sure most Catholics are going to get to heaven. They just have a little extra baggage to carry along the way. So, to get back to this, me being able to talk now, Hollywood picks up and moves to Georgia. So I'm retired from my technical work. I'm retired from everything. I'm trying to find something to do. I was producing films because I wanted to be involved in it, but I didn't think I ever wanted to be on camera or work around that. And I got to where I was starting to do things where I was getting on camera. So I did a lot of extra work. And I knew some of the casting people because I had used them with the productions that I worked on. So it got to where I was getting really cool jobs, getting featured a lot. They wanted me to do stand-in work because that's something that you got to have someone that knows what they're doing. But I found that most directors didn't let stand-ins hang around and watch what's going on, and I wanted to do that. So being an extra, which didn't pay as well, that allowed me to be on set. I could see everything going on. I could see how the directors directed. And I've got a couple of films that I've produced and directed, but just to say that I did them, not to make a career out of it. But I got to where I had no problem getting up, and the independent work I've done, you can find me on IMDb, Internet Movie Database, imdb.com, under Larry Fleming. Lawrence is my legal name, but I started it with Larry, and you can't change rolling credits. But God got me into that so I could get to where I could have no problem speaking in front of people. If God had wanted me to get up and be a preacher, he would have had to have worked on me a lot earlier. But if he had wanted me to do what I'm doing now, it worked out just fine. And I would, throughout my Christian life, I would teach Bible study. I've taught it a number of times. Different churches as we've moved. Been a participant in others where I didn't actually get up and teach because they had established teachers in there, and I didn't want to shove anybody out of the way. But, if they know you're a teacher, it gets to where, does anybody know this? And they look around the room, and then he turns to me and goes, "Larry," and I answer the question as best I can, usually correctly. I'm going to need to go back and sit in my car in a little bit. We're at the 30-minute time limit. I've got to keep these no more than 30 minutes as best I can, with a little bit of outdoor footage at the end so that I can get these uploaded in this very, very weak internet here. I don't remember it being this bad before. It must be the temperature. Like I said, it's got to do with as frequencies are bouncing off the atmosphere to get here. And in the summertime, it's higher and it gets here better. But I'm 30 minutes from the nearest gas station. If you want to call it a town, you can, but it's a gas station and a Dollar General and a couple other little stores. It's one of those, if you blink, you miss it when you're driving through. All right, that's all I have on me right now. God has been so good to me and blessed me on all the things that I've done. Everything that's happened for the good, I've enjoyed, and it's been a pleasure to work with God. Things that were bad, as I look back, they were control. They were directional controls. I wasn't going to be in the right spot at the right time, but God made sure I was by having something happen. You may not be happy about it when you're in the middle of something like that, but once you get there, you're in the right spot. All right, let me get my glove off. We're still watching, we're still waiting. We see the world continuing to spiral downward. We're told pretty much what's going to happen, and as we look around, it's happening. Never before have we had a chance to live in a time where we could watch prophecy being carried out, but we can, and we are seeing it. Don't be frightened by it. God will always protect you, always. And that's why we're going to be snatched away to get us out of the clutches of Satan. So keep watching. I can't give you a date. Nobody can. If they can, they're guessing. And guessing is not good when you're talking about the Bible. It should be right. Okay, well, I have my next video already planned out, my lesson plan. I did it last night. So I'll insert this in the middle, and then I see if I can get the other one done and get them both uploaded today. Take some of this pressure off. Till we meet in the clouds, God bless. Very tame deer here. Well, there's some water leading into the Swanee River, and those trees are just dead, dormant forest right now. And there's no alligators anywhere along here that I can see. It's too cold for them. Although we made it, I think, to 65 today. Let me go forward. Goes way up in there.